Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 8 of our reading of Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous. Just going to double check really quick to make sure this is actually part 8. Make sure I'm not mistaken here. Part 7, part 8. Okay. Yes, this is indeed part 8 of our reading. So, anyways, we read quite a few stories in the last part, but first of all, we're going to go over the copyright information, which will be on your screen right now. I'm turning into it right now. It says, the author gratefully acknowledges the invaluable assistance of Robert Arthur in the preparation of this volume. It's published by, and it has all that right there, and all the copyright information and all the different printings, if you're interested in that kind of thing. But now that we've gone over that, I'm going to have the acknowledgments on the screen for a little bit, so you can read those if you want to. But I'm not going to actually read those aloud. It looks like that might take some time. Anyways, in the last part, we did read quite a few stories, but we ended up on The Dog Died First by Bruno Fischer. Now, apparently the wife was out playing bridge or something, and she hit a dog. It was still alive, so she put it in her car, and she went in and she got some water to try to wash the blood off of the car seat or something. And now someone's at the door. So, anyways, we're going to see. Okay. We're going to start at the very top of this page. I don't know where we left off because it was a week ago since I recorded this, but I want to make sure that we don't miss anything. I mumbled, turning my head to let her know I was too sleepy for conversation, but as nothing ever stopped Dot from talking, my desire for slumber didn't. But as nothing ever stopped Dot from talking, my desire for slumber didn't. Okay. I'd trained myself to absorb her chatter without listening to it, and that was what I did, until a startling sentence jerked me full awake. I couldn't get all the blood off, she said. Blood? I breathed, opening my eyes wide. Did you say blood? Dot was taking a nightgown out of a drawer. He died on the way to the doctor, she said complacently. I feel like a murderer. She straightened up with the nightgown in her hand. The soft, dim nightlight played over her tightly and precisely formed body, and her face was as guileless as a doll's. Who died? I demanded hoarsely. The dog, of course, she said, dropping the nightgown over her head. I sank back on the bed. A dog, of course. Well, what had I really expected? I wasn't going to tell you because you're always criticizing my driving, she explained, like when I smashed a fender last week. But I really couldn't help what happened tonight. The dog ran right under the wheel. Then when I got home, I noticed the blood in the car and tried to wash it off, but I couldn't quite because it had dried. I decided to tell you because you'll see it tomorrow. I was drowsy again, but puzzled. How does blood get inside a car when you run over a dog? He was still breathing, so I took him to the vet, but he was dead when I got there. The dog, I mean. The poor little thing. She put out the light and got into bed, but that didn't stop her voice. She told me about the $1.17 she had lost at bridge, and that Ida Walker looked dowdy and Marie Cannon stunning, and Edith Bauer. How about some sleep? I complained. She was quiet for about a minute. It seemed to me. Then she was shaking me. Bernie, she whispered, there's someone sneaking about outside with a flashlight. The radium clock said 10 minutes after 3, which meant that I'd actually been asleep for 2 hours. Dot was sitting up, and past the vague outline of her shoulder and through the window I saw a splotch of light move along the side of the car. Maybe he's trying to steal the car, she whispered. Did you leave the key in the ignition? It didn't surprise me when she admitted that she thought she had. Snorting, I got out of bed and went to the window. Whoever held the flashlight seemed to have lost interest in the car and was walking toward the street. He's going away, I said hopefully. I was a man who liked to avoid trouble. I wonder what he wanted. I know what I want, I said. Sleep. I had one leg on the bed when the doorbell rang. I froze, half on the bed, listening. There was a few things more there are a few things more disturbing than a doorbell ringing at 3 in the morning. That must be the thief, Dot whispered. I roused myself. Thieves don't ring doorbells. Well, it's somebody, Dot pointed out. It certainly was somebody. The doorbell kept on ringing. I fumbled into slippers and a robe, went into the living room, turned on the light, opened the front door. The man who entered held a flashlight in his hand, so he was the same one I had seen prowling outside. He had more paunch than chest and a lumpy face. Mr. Bernard Hall, he said. I nodded. What is it? He didn't answer. He stepped past me into the living room, looking it over as if he were thinking of renting it. Then he fixed me with rather sad eyes. My boy Steve is in your history class. Stefan Ricardo. Ah, yes, I said, using my teacher-parent manner. But that was absurd. This man had got me out of bed at 3 in the morning to discuss his son's scholastic problems. Then I remembered what there must be a typo here because now it says Stefan. Up here it says Stefan. What Stefan Ricardo had told me his father did for a living, and I tensed. You're a detective, I said. That's right, Ricardo massaged his jowls. Seems there's blood in your car. Is that what you were looking at with your flashlight? He nodded. Uh-huh. There was an attempt made to wash it off, but it was soaked into the floor rug. At that moment, Dot came into the living room. She wore her flowered housecoat over the nightgown. I'm the one you want, she said, I suppose. I shouldn't have left the body in the bushes. Ricardo pushed his hat back from his brow and blinked a couple of times. You admit you did it, Mrs. Hall? Should I have reported to the police? She handed him that disarming smile of hers. The thing is, I didn't want any trouble. No, Ricardo said softly. I guess you didn't want trouble. He kept looking at Dot as if he wasn't quite believing she existed. Why did you do it, Mrs. Hall? It was an accident. He ran in front of the car. Ricardo shook his head sorrowfully. That won't get you anywhere, Mrs. Hall. His head was smashed in, but there was no other marks on the body. But that's impossible. I held him in my arms, and his head looked all right. He seemed to be injured internally. He died before I could get him to the vet. The vet? Ricardo said, blinking. Dr. Harrison, the veterinary on Mill Street, she explained patiently. Where else would I take a dog? Ricardo opened his mouth, but he didn't say what he started to. Instead, he drew in air. Suppose, Mrs. Hall, you tell me about it. Dot settled herself in the armchair and placidly crossed her fine legs. I struck a cigarette between my lips and noticed that the matchbook shook in my hand. I didn't for a moment believe that a detective would awaken and question her at 3 a.m. in the morning because a dog had been run over. I was driving to a bridge game at Marie Cannon's tonight, she said, about 2 blocks from here. A little black dog ran in front of the car, and I couldn't stop in time. I got out, and there was the poor creature in terrible agony. He was a little thing, all black with white paws and a white splotch on his face. I don't know what breed, though he had some Spitz in him, because when I was a little girl, I had a Spitz that was the darlingest. What time was this? Ricardo broke in. Close to 8:30. Marie Cannon was anxious that we get to her house at 8:30, and it was just about that when I left here. I would be late, but I couldn't leave an injured dog lying in the road, so I put him in my car and drove to the vet. To Dr. Harrison on Mill Street, Ricardo said rather grimly. A good 7 miles away, though you were late. Do you know of a nearer veterinary? Ricardo admitted that he didn't. So I had no choice, Dot said, but when I got there, I saw that the poor dog had died, so there was no point in taking him into Dr. Harrison. I drove back to East Bilford and left the dog in some bushes beside the road. Just like that, Ricardo sighed. Dot flushed guiltily. I suppose it was a cruel thing to do, but by then it was about 10 minutes after 9, and the bridge game couldn't start until I got there because I made the fourth, and Marie Cannon would be furious with me. And after all, the dog was dead, wasn't he? And I did look to see if he had a license, and he didn't. He didn't even have a collar. He was obviously a stray dog, and I didn't know what else to do with him. After that gush of words, there was silence. I filled it by saying, I suppose killing a dog should be reported to the police. That's the law, isn't it? Uh-huh. He glanced at me and then returned his sad gaze at Dot. Did you get blood on your dress when you picked him up? I'm sure I didn't. One of the women at the bridge game would have noticed if I had, she frowned. He didn't seem to bleed at all, but he must have because I saw blood in the car when I got home hours later. Where did you leave the body? On Pine Road, in a section where there are no houses. Just this side of that dirt road. Wilson Lane, he said. Yeah, that's it. A short distance past Wilson Lane, coming towards town, there are thick bushes on the right side. That's where I left him. Ricardo nodded and scratched his chin with the backs of his fingers. He was a plump man with too much waist and jowls, but the set of his lumpy face frightened me. You better get dressed, Mrs. Hall, he said, and go there with me. Her blue eyes widened. You mean right now? Right now. I'm going too, I said. Sure, Ricardo said. We went into the bedroom and put on clothes. I don't understand why they make so much trouble about a dog being run over, Dot complained as she slipped her shoes on. Of course I feel bad about it, but getting people out of bed in the middle of the night, why doesn't he just give me a ticket and I'll pay the fine? I didn't say anything. My stomach was sickishly empty. We drove in Ricardo's sedan, the three of us in the front seat. On the way, Dot said, I suppose Al Wilcox saw me carrying the dog into the bushes. He lives down the street and knows me. I saw his white police car pass when I returned to my car. That's right, Mrs. Hall, Ricardo said grimly. It was less than a mile to the spot. 3 cars were parked along the side of the road, and by the light of a couple of powerful electric lanterns, I saw 5 or 6 men gathered on the narrow grassy stretch between the shoulder of the road and the line of thick bushes. One of them was Al Wilcox in his policeman's uniform. All these men because a dog was killed, Dot said, even she was catching on that something bigger than that must be up. Ricardo had no comment. He led us across the road, and then I saw the long shape under the canvas. The men had become silent and were looking at Dot. Mrs. Hall, is this the spot? Ricardo asked. She nodded and slipped her hand through my arm. She frowned at the size of the thing under the canvas. Give her a look, Al, Ricardo said. Wilcox bent over and gripped the end of the canvas and pulled it down. Dot uttered a shrill scream. I felt her sag against my side, clinging to my arm. Why, that's Emmett Walker, she gasped. I played bridge with his wife tonight. It was Emmett Walker, all right, but no longer the handsome insurance agent Dot and I had known for years. His blonde hair was matted with dried blood, and some of it had run in ragged streaks over his face. Cover him up, Al, Ricardo said wearily. He turned to Dot, and there was controlled fury in his voice. He was murdered, Mrs. Hall. But where's the dog? Dot stammered. There is no dog, Mrs. Hall. But I left him right here in those bushes. No, Mrs. Hall, Ricardo said. You struck Emmett Walker over the head with something and killed him. You dragged him into your car and drove here and dragged him into the bushes. That's how the blood got in your car. That's not true. Dot had recovered from the shock and was now merely indignant. At that point, I should have said something. I should have come to my wife's defense, but even if I hadn't been too choked for words, I couldn't think of any that would do any good. Al Wilcox spoke up. I was passing here at a few minutes after 9, Mrs. Hall, when I saw you come out of those bushes and get into your car. At 2 o'clock, I passed this way again, and by my headlights, I saw what looked like a man's leg sticking out of the bushes. I investigated and found him. Well, I didn't do it, Dot said angrily. Why would I want to kill Emmett Walker? Suppose you tell us, Mrs. Hall. Dot turned to me in exasperation. You tried to make him understand, darling. I gulped air into my lungs. I said, of course you didn't do it, but my voice was quavered. Ricardo moved away from us to consult with the other policemen in undertones. When he returned to us, he asked Dot if the dress she had on was the one that she had worn at the bridge game. She said that it was. Then he asked me for the keys to my car and handed them to Wilcox. Okay, let's go, Ricardo snapped. I didn't ask him where. I knew where. This time, there were 4 of us in the sedan. I sat beside Ricardo, who drove, and Dot sat in the back seat with another detective. Ricardo didn't waste time. He had questions for Dot as we drove. Where did you say the bridge game was? At Marie Cannon's house. Is she the wife of George Cannon, the lawyer? Yes. Who else was there? There were only 4 of us besides Marie and myself. There was Edith Bauer and Ida Walker. Her voice broke a little. Poor Ida. Who is going to break the news to her? She knows already, Ricardo said. She didn't take the news too hard. They haven't got along too well lately. There were rumors that Emmett wasn't, exactly faithful to her. Dot leaned forward towards the back of Ricardo's neck, and her voice was breathless. Do you think that Ida killed him? I know who killed him, Ricardo said crisply. That ended all talk until we reached the county building, which also contained police headquarters and the county jail. Dot was taken into an office on the 2nd floor, but I got no further than the door. You might as well go home, Ricardo told me. Your wife is being held. What are you going to do to her? Give her the 3rd degree? His humpy face smiled a little. We're going to question her. She's entitled to have a lawyer present. Sure, he waved a pudgy hand. You'll find a phone booth down the hall. I went into the booth and dialed George Cannon's number. His voice was drowsy, but it got wide awake when I told him what was up. I'll be right there, he said. I waited out in the hall. In 10 minutes, George Cannon arrived. His hair was mushed, and his suit looked like a sack on his frail body, but that wasn't because he'd dressed in a hurry. He always managed to look seedy and disheveled, though he was the most prominent lawyer in East Bilford. Briefly, I gave him the details. His thin mouth tightened as he listened. Emmett was supposed to call for Ida tonight. He told me. She waited in my house until 1 o'clock, and then I drove her home. I think she suspected that he was out with another woman, and all that time he was dead. Don't stand here talking, I said. Goodness knows what they're doing to Dot. Oh, they won't be rough with a woman. You wait here, Bernie. He knocked at the door through which Dot had been taken and was admitted. For a full hour, I paced the lonely hall before George came out. Glumly, he shook his head. They've taken her up to the cell through another door. She hasn't been charged yet. There are still loose ends. How does it look? It's too soon to tell, he said, not meeting my eyes. If the blood in your car is a dog's, then their circumstantial case will be shot. He patted my shoulder. No use hanging around here. Go home and get some sleep. He dropped me off at my house. Dawn was coming up, and in the gayness of it, I saw that my car was gone. The police had taken it because it was evidence that might mean life or death. The house was terribly empty. I went into the bedroom, and there was her nightgown flung across the floor of the bed. I remembered how only a few hours ago I had watched her getting into that nightgown, and nobody could have looked less like a woman who had just murdered somebody. She hadn't. She said so. She was flighty and talkative, but she She never before lied to me, but she had never before had occasion to lie about murder. I tossed in the bed for an hour and slept fitfully for another hour. Then the doorbell woke me. It was Herman Bauer, a fellow teacher at the high school. His wife, Edith, was an old friend of Dot's. Herman's chubby and usually Herman, chubby and usually jolly, was now glum and embarrassed. He said that he had stopped off on his way to school to tell me that the police had questioned him and Edith. They got us out of bed at 6:30 this morning, Herman said. They asked Edith about the bridge game last night, when Dot arrived, when she left, if she'd been in the house all that time, and so on. They also asked how well Dot and Emmett knew each other. Had known each other. He fumbled uneasily with the brim of his hat. Neither Edith nor I mentioned that Dot used to go out with Emmett. That was years ago, I said, before Dot and I were engaged. Of course, Herman watched his fingers on his hat, but the police might not understand. He turned to the door. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. After Herman Bauer was gone, I stood in the same spot for a long time. He had it all figured out, the way everybody else figured it, and the police certainly did. I couldn't know that they weren't right. Rousing myself, I went to the phone to call the school and say that I wouldn't be in that day, and maybe not for the rest of the week. Before I could start to dial the number, the phone rang. It was George Cannon, and he said, "Bernie, can you come over to the district attorney's office right away? Did anything new break?" "Yes, but I'm afraid it's not good. The blood in your car has been analyzed." He paused and then added tonelessly, "It's human blood, and it matches Emmett Walker's blood type." There went the last hope, I thought as I hung up. Police, science had proved Dot's story about the dog a lie, and if that was false, everything else she had said was. I dressed and left the house. The police had my car, so I had to walk to the county building. Detective Ricardo and George Cannon were in the district attorney's office. John Fair, the DA, was one of those back-slapping politicians who never met a voter without heartily pumping his hand. But when I entered his office, he merely nodded gravely and remained in his seat. "The analysis of the blood in your car leaves no doubt that your wife's guilt," Fair began brutally. "It took her some 40 minutes to arrive at the bridge game after she left home, a distance of a little over a mile. We know now that her delay was not caused by killing a dog and driving out to Dr. Harrison and back. She told the far-fetched story about the dog to explain her delay and also the blood in her car. Obviously, she met Emmett Walker and killed him with a blunt instrument, probably as he was sitting in the car with her." "What time was Walker killed?" I asked, gasping at a straw. "I mean, if he died after she arrived at the bridge game." Ricardo shook his heavy head. "The medical examiner can't cut it that fine. Says he thinks Walker died between 9 and 10:30 last night, and he'll give or take a half an hour at either end." What does my wife say?" I said weakly. Fair shrugged irritably. "In spite of virtually conclusive evidence, she sticks to her preposterous story about the dog. A very stubborn young woman and extremely foolish." He rose and came around his desk. "Hall, I'm not out for her neck. We have learned that she and Walker were sweethearts at one time. Sorry to have to say this to you, but it appears that she continued to be one of his women up until last night." "No," I heard myself shout. "We haven't proved it yet," Fair admitted, "but that explains her motive for killing him. Let us say that she struck him in jealous rage. In that case, I would not insist on a first-degree murder indictment. I want you to talk to her, Hall. I want you to make her see that it will be to her advantage to make a full confession." "Prison," I said brutally. "Is that what you offer her? Years and years in prison?" It's better than the electric chair, Ferris said softly, and returned to his desk. George Cannon hadn't said a word since I entered the office. He was our legal mind. I asked him for his opinion. Bernie, I'm against any deal, he declared. I believe I can get her off free. He believed? I looked at him, standing there, seedy and slight, and at his pinched face and that perpetually hungry expression. He was East Bilford's top lawyer, but it was a small city, and his reputation didn't extend beyond it. He didn't think her innocent. Nobody did. But he was willing to risk her life to build up his reputation in a sensational murder trial. I'll talk to her, I told the district attorney. Ricardo let me upstairs to a small, bare room containing only a few chairs and left me there. A few minutes later, a matron brought Dot in. Let me check. There were tired lines about her eyes and mouth, but she looked beautiful. She felt wonderful in my arms, and her tremulous mouth was unendurably sweet. The electric chair, I thought dully, or years in prison. That would be a living death for her. Okay, we have been reading from Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Stories Not for the Nervous, but specifically we've been reading The Dog Died First by, I believe it was Bruno Fischer. The Dog Died First, Bruno Fischer, yep. And so if you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, or if you want to join the Discord server, then all the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.